They called the cops on me for trying to put solar panels on my roof. But they didn't expect I'd call my lawyer, and definitely didn't expect I'd call the news. What started as a simple home upgrade turned into fines, threats, and a full-on legal battle with my HOA, but I fought back and took down the board. This isn't just a story about one neighborhood, it's a warning to every homeowner. Here's how I exposed the abuse, rallied the community, and turned the tables on the HOA that tried to ruin me. I used to think homeowners associations were just about lawn rules, mailboxes, and making sure nobody painted their house neon green. You know, neighborhood order, keep the peace. But what I didn't realize, what no one warns you about, that some HOAs operate more like mini dictatorships, and in my case, it only took one disagreement to send everything spiraling out of control. Let me start from the beginning. 2 years ago, I moved into what was supposed to be my dream home. 3 bedrooms, a little yard, a quiet cul-de-sac, and neighbors who smiled and waved when you passed by. Everything looked perfect on paper. I figured paying HOA dues was just part of the package, a necessary evil. I paid them on time, followed the rules, didn't cause any problems. But trouble doesn't always start with breaking the rules. It starts when you stand up for yourself. It began with something small. I'd decided to install a few solar panels on my roof. Nothing extreme, just enough to lower my electric bill and be a little more eco-friendly. I submitted the request to the HOA, just like I was supposed to. Filled out all their forms, included the panel schematics, and waited. Weeks passed. No response. So I emailed them. No reply. Then I called. No answer. Eventually, I went down to the HOA office in person and asked what was going on. That's when I met Carol. Every neighborhood has a Carol. Sharp, bob haircut, clipboard glued to her hand, and a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. She's the president of the HOA, and seems to believe the neighborhood exists solely under her divine rule. When I asked about my solar panel request, she didn't even look at the forms. She just said, "That kind of installation isn't really in line with our community's aesthetic." I was stunned. I told her it was my property. I showed her that our state law actually protects the right to install solar panels. But she brushed me off like I was asking to build a skate park in the driveway. That was the first warning sign. But I didn't know yet how far this would go. A few days later, I started getting compliance notices in the mail. One said my trash bins were visible from the street, despite the fact that they'd been in the exact same place since I moved in. Another said my grass was 2 inches too long. I kid you not, 2 inches. I had literally just mowed it. And then came the real kicker, a fine for unapproved exterior modification. Guess what that referred to? The solar panel brackets, which hadn't even been installed yet, just brackets, sitting in a box on my back patio. At that point, I decided I wasn't going to roll over. I pushed back. I sent a formal letter, asking for a hearing. I presented the state law. I brought printed copies of similar homes in the area that had solar panels. Carol and her board just sat there blank-faced and said it would be under review. That was the last I heard of it. The cops showed up at my door. Yes, the actual police. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was inside fixing my kitchen sink when there was loud banging on the front door. I opened it to find 2 officers standing there. One of them said they'd received a report of unauthorized construction and disturbances caused by heavy equipment. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. I hadn't even begun installation. No trucks, no noise. No work had been done, but they were serious. I showed them around the property, explained everything. Luckily, the officers were pretty reasonable. They told me it sounded like a civil issue and that they had no grounds to take action. Still, it was embarrassing. My neighbors were peeking through their blinds. One even came out to ask if everything was okay, and I knew exactly who called them. I went straight to the HOA office on Monday morning. I demanded an explanation. Carol wasn't there. Surprise, surprise. I left a written complaint, and that's when I decided I was done playing nice. I called my lawyer. Now, I didn't have a big-shot legal team or anything, just a family lawyer I'd worked with a couple of times. I explained the situation to her, every letter, every fine, every passive-aggressive note taped to my door. She looked over the documents and, to my surprise, said I actually had a pretty strong case. The harassment was well documented. The denial of my solar panel request violated state energy laws, and calling the police over non-existent construction that bordered on defamation. But instead of sending a letter to the HOA, we decided to take a different approach, one that would catch them off guard. I called a local news station. I figured if I was dealing with petty neighborhood politics, the only thing that might make people pay attention was shining a spotlight on it. And let me tell you, the moment I said the words HOA harassment and solar panels blocked illegally, their producer perked up. A few days later, a news van pulled up to my driveway. We did an interview right there on the lawn. I showed them the paperwork, the letters, the citations. I even pointed out that my grass was mowed, my bins were hidden, and my roof still solar panel free. It aired 2 nights later, and that's when things really exploded. The neighborhood Facebook group lost its mind. People started sharing their own horror stories, fines for wind chimes, letters for excessive Halloween decorations. Someone even said they got cited for letting their dog sit in the front window too often. Turns out, I wasn't the only one being targeted. I was just the first one to speak up. That moment when I saw the tide start to turn, that's when I knew. I wasn't just dealing with overzealous rule enforcers. I was dealing with bullies hiding behind policy. And I wasn't going to back down. What I didn't know at the time was that this story was just getting started. The HOA wasn't going to take this embarrassment lying down. The day after the news story aired, something changed in the neighborhood. People I'd never even spoken to before were waving at me, giving thumbs ups, even thanking me for standing up. I didn't realize how many people had been quietly suffering under the HOA's micromanagement until now. Carol's perfect little kingdom. Cracks were starting to show. But what happens when you embarrass a control freak on live TV? They go nuclear. It started the following week. I came home from work and saw a bright red violation notice stuck to my front door. This one said I was in violation of community appearance guidelines because I had left a garden hose coiled neatly. I might add, next to the spigot in my backyard. My backyard, which no one can see from the street unless they're actively spying. I thought it was petty, but I laughed it off. One violation wasn't going to break me. Then came the next one. Improper mailbox maintenance. Apparently, the paint on my mailbox was fading unevenly. I kid you not. Uneven fading. It's a mailbox, not a luxury car. But okay, I repainted it just to shut them up. Then came the third. Unauthorized signage. What was the sign, you ask? A small, discreet, protected by security cameras sticker on my window? That was enough to earn me a fine and another official warning. Now I knew they were just trying to provoke me, but the real gut punch came when I received a certified letter from the HOA lawyer. They were threatening to put a lien on my house, yes, a lien, over unpaid fines. Fines I had formally disputed, many of which weren't even valid in the first place. Their justification? That I was endangering community standards and disrupting the HOA's authority by going public? The phrase, disrupting the HOA's authority, lives rent-free in my head now, like we were living under some neighborhood dictatorship. They weren't just retaliating, they were trying to financially punish me into submission. So I called my lawyer. Again, she reviewed the documents, and that's when we decided it was time to escalate. Not only were their fines baseless, but their threats were legally questionable, especially the lien. We filed a cease and desist, demanding they stop issuing violations for non-existent infractions and rescind all pending fines. We also made it clear that any further attempt to damage my property rights would result in a lawsuit. And then, just to add a little more pressure, I reached back out to the news station. This time, the story got even more attention. HOA retaliates against homeowner for going public. They interviewed more residents. They covered the lien threat. One elderly couple even shared how they were fined for installing a wheelchair ramp without visual approval. People were outraged by now. Carol wasn't smiling anymore. In fact, she wasn't even seen at the HOA meetings. She started sending a proxy. A guy named Brian who looked like he regretted ever agreeing to be involved. You could feel the tension. In every meeting now, for the first time, the board wasn't in control. The homeowners were speaking up, asking questions, demanding transparency, bringing copies of bylaws and state statutes. We even started a petition to audit the HOA's finances. That's when things got weird. One morning, I woke up to find my car had been egged. Nothing was stolen, nothing broken, just eggs dripping down the windshield. I couldn't prove who did it, but the timing was suspicious. 2 days later, someone slashed the cable to my home security camera. Thankfully, I had backups. I turned the footage over to police. Still no definitive evidence, but it was clear this wasn't just a random prank. It felt like intimidation. Someone wanted me to back down. Spoiler. IDN single quotes T. Instead, we filed for an emergency hearing with the state's HOA regulatory board. My lawyer helped me present every document: the denial of my solar panel rights, the false citations, the recorded threats, the retaliation that followed the news coverage. We even had statements from neighbors willing to testify that they, too, had been targeted. The board scheduled a hearing within the month that sent shockwaves through the HOA. Suddenly, Carol started backpedaling. Some of the fines were reviewed and waived. The lien a clerical misunderstanding, the citations prematurely issued. They knew the hammer was about to drop, and they were scrambling to cover themselves, but it was too late. Neighbors started organizing. We formed an independent homeowners group to push for transparency and accountability. People began showing up at meetings in droves. They were mad. One guy even stood up and read his entire file of bogus violations going back 5 years. People clapped. Others shared stories of being told to remove porch furniture, repaint shutters, hide children's bikes, even replant entire garden beds, because the HOA didn't like the species of flowers. This wasn't about keeping the neighborhood nice. It was about control. At the next meeting, we voted to begin the process of removing Carol and several board members for abuse of power. According to the bylaws, we needed a super majority, so we went door to door, collected signatures, talked to people, told the truth, and you know what? Most people were on our side. Some had been quiet for years, afraid to speak up. But once they realized they weren't alone, once they saw someone fight back, they joined in. Carol tried one last move. She filed a complaint claiming I was inciting a neighborhood rebellion. I laughed when I read it. Rebellion? No, what we were doing was called democracy. By the end of that month, we had the signatures we needed. Carol and 2 board members were officially removed. A new election was scheduled, new leadership, new priorities. And at the top of our list, reform the entire system. Looking back, I can't believe how quickly things escalated. From a simple solar panel request to a full-on legal showdown. But I wouldn't change any of it. Because for the first time in a long time, I feel like I actually live in the neighborhood I thought I was buying into. You'd think after getting the HOA board voted out, things would quiet down. That the drama would settle. The neighbors would get back to barbecues and block parties, and life would return to normal. But nope, what happened next opened my eyes to just how broken the system really is, not just in my neighborhood, but in thousands of others across the country. After Carol and her crew were ousted, we elected a new, more transparent HOA board, people who actually lived here, listened, and cared. Things started changing immediately. The bogus fines were paused for a full review. The lien threat was withdrawn, and residents were finally encouraged to attend meetings and give input without feeling like they were interrupting royalty. It felt like justice. But there was one problem. The damage Carol had done wasn't limited to just bad leadership. She had left a paper trail of violations, fines, and legal threats that affected over a dozen homeowners. Some of them had already paid fines they shouldn't have. Others had their property values impacted by false flags in the HOA system. One family was even in the process of selling their home, and because of an unresolved dispute manufactured by Carol, they lost the sale. So we decided to go bigger. We weren't just going to fix our neighborhood. We were going to fix the system. That's when I discovered just how unregulated HOAs really are in many states. These organizations have the power to fine, to sue, and even foreclose on properties, and, in some places, there's no oversight at all. They're private entities, but they operate with the authority of local government. The more I read, the more I realized our situation wasn't unique. It was common, so I got back in touch with the local news. This time, I pitched a broader investigation, not just into our HOA, but into how these associations operate, and the legal gray area they often exploit. They were interested, and they started interviewing residents in other communities. Within 2 weeks, it turned into a 4-part investigative report. Guess what happened next? Emails, dozens of them, then hundreds. People from all over the state and even out of state sharing their horror stories. HOAs threatening elderly homeowners. Veterans being fined for displaying flags. Families getting notices for having a birthday party in their backyard without pre-approval. It was like opening a floodgate of frustration. At this point, I realized we had momentum. People were angry. People were motivated. So we did something bold. We drafted a proposal for new state legislation, with help from my lawyer and a few local activists. We outlined a bill we called the Homeowner Rights and Transparency Act. It included mandatory state oversight for HOAs, caps on fines, and clear appeals processes. Prohibition on unauthorized liens or legal threats without court approval, protections for homeowners installing renewable energy systems, a statewide database to track HOA complaints and patterns of abuse. It was ambitious, but it was necessary. And with the press coverage we found an ally in the state legislature, representative who had her own battle with an HOA years ago. She agreed to sponsor the bill. Now, I'll be honest, getting a bill even considered is a long road. There are committees, public comment periods, lobbying pressure. The big HOA management companies didn't like it. They pushed back hard. But we had something they didn't. Real stories. Real homeowners. Real pain. We organized a town hall. Hundreds showed up. We told our stories. We showed evidence. And when the cameras rolled again, the pressure was on. You can ignore a few complaints, but you can't ignore a movement. The bill made it out of committee. It still has a ways to go. But just getting it to that point sparked a bigger conversation statewide. Local news stations started reporting on HOAs more critically. Homeowners began demanding clearer contracts, better representation, and voting rights in their own communities. And guess what? Carol was nowhere to be found. Last I heard, she moved to another gated community about an hour away. I genuinely hope she finds peace, but more importantly, I hope she never gets her hands on another HOA board again. As for our neighborhood, it's different now. Not perfect, but different in a good way. There's more laughter at the playground, more porch lights on during holidays, more conversations between neighbors that aren't just nods on garbage day. We set up a neighborhood forum, one that isn't run by the board, but by the people. Questions, concerns, ideas, they're all welcome. Our HOA fees are now transparently itemized. And that solar panel project, it finally got approved, installed, functional, and it's saving me a ton. But beyond the panels, beyond the news stories, beyond the meetings and signatures and lawyer calls, something more important happened. We proved that when people stand together, the rules can change. Even the ones that feel rigged from the start. I get emails now from people asking for advice, how to fight back, how to gather support, how to challenge unfair HOAs. I tell them the truth. It's hard. It takes patience, documentation, and sometimes public pressure. But it's possible. You just can't be afraid to speak up. So if you're watching this right now and you're dealing with your own HOA nightmare, don't give up. Document everything. Know your rights. Find allies. Use your voice. And when they try to bully you into silence, call your lawyer and maybe call the news too, because no one gets to take your home from you with a clipboard and a power trip, not without a fight. And now, the fight's just getting started.